Good morning. Today is August the 10th, 2020, and I'm Sallieann Harrison. And I guess that if you found me here on YouTube, you're tuning in for some sewing and patchwork chit-chat. If you haven't, then you're in the wrong place. But if you have, you're definitely in the right place. Okay, so this is a little bit of a catch-up about and background about me, and then I'm going to move on and do a little sewing room tour. So if you haven't come across me before, I am a patchwork and quilting tutor based in the UK. I learned to quilt in early 2000. It was between 2000 and 2003 when I lived in North Carolina in Newburn. And I had one of those epiphany moments. I went out one day walking through the sort of downtown area, and I came across a shop which was full of stained glass, and being a colour junkie, I was actually drawn in by the colour and stood there amongst looking around at the glass. I noticed there was another door at the back of the store, and if you went through above the door it said sewing shop, and you went through the door and it was a complete patchwork and quilting store. I had never been anything like it in my life before, and I stood there and I knew that I was totally smitten. And so for the next 3 years I took classes, I bought fabric, I made quilts, and I was taught at that time by a really talented lady called Michelle May, and she now runs a company called the Raspberry Rabbits. But she was an incredible tutor, and she still is an absolutely fantastic friend. Anyway, in 2003 we had to come back to the UK, so it was bye-bye sun, back to the UK, and I had to get a proper job. It was a very sad moment. So I started off, I did a degree in education at the UWE in Bristol, and the plan was that I was going to complete the degree and go into primary teaching. I never actually did that. I decided by the end of the degree I didn't really want to teach primary at all anymore, and I ended up getting a job with Ofsted for the next, which I was in for the next for 10 years until 2016. I was a statistician there, and I also worked on inspections and inspection data, so it was a very popular job. But in the background, all while I was still sewing, I did some shows, I exhibited, I did some work for the American Museum at Bath, which was an incredible place to go if you've never been there, because they've got a fantastic quilt collection. I did some work for John Lewis, did some workshops and patterns for magazines, and I also did little sewing, patchwork and quilting groups and one-to-one sessions. The bug never left me, it had really bitten. And then in 2016 I was made redundant. It was like, oh my God, all my dreams had come true. I was finally made redundant. I was released from this job, and now was the time to really get into the sewing. So I reached out to various places, and I started off by working for Denman College, which is part of, what's the word I'm looking for? The WI, the Women's Institute in the UK. They have their own residential venue, and they run courses, not just patchwork and quilting or sewing courses. They do like stained glass, baking, all that sort of thing at this particular college in Oxford. So I ran some patchwork and quilting courses there with some lovely ladies, and I did some little fabric boxes and all sorts of other things, and that was a really good thing to do. It was really sort of expanding my horizons. And it was at that point that I got a call from Sewing Quarter TV, and they invited me up for a screen test. I couldn't believe it. I was amazed that they bothered to invite me. And I went up for a screen test, and I actually passed it with flying colours. I think it was down to the beard trimmer moment, but perhaps we'll get onto that in another video. Anyway, I started working for Sewing Quarter TV in August 2018, and I worked there until November 2019. And it was it really was an incredible place to work. I met some fantastic people, and I love, you know, doing although the demos were nerve-wracking to start off with, doing live TV is really sort of like the first one I wasn't too worried. As I got further and further into it, I got a little bit more worried, because you sort of build people up as fans and followers, and they'd be messaging you and saying, I'm looking forward to seeing you the weekend. Whereas like the first show, you could convince yourself that no one was watching because nobody really knew you. But as time went on and people were going, oh, we're tuning in this weekend, you felt like there was like a moral responsibility to produce a good show. But I mean, the fans were amazing, and they would message you after the show and say, oh, you know, I did stop cleaning my bathroom and I decided to make your little block instead. And you think, yes, I'm having an impact. I'm inspiring people to give up the housework and make more crafty stuff. So it was fantastic. They were a wonderful organisation to work for. And then sadly in November this year, I heard that they were going to cease, and that they would probably cease in January 2020. And it was at that point I thought, well, I'm going to have to find something to do with myself. So I'd been on a few cruises previously. I'd been on 2 sewing cruises. So I thought now is the time to actually go forth and try and pull a sewing cruise together. So that's exactly what I did. I've cruised with Royal Caribbean before. I went to Royal Caribbean, I discussed with them what I was looking for, and I set up a European cruise for August this year, which obviously, because of the COVID-19 situation, hasn't happened. That cruise has now been moved into 2021, so and most of the ladies that were actually booked on have stayed with me, so hopefully by then things will go ahead. After that, I also set up a sewing retreat with a lady called Becky Alexander Frost. You might know her better as Baffa, and also with Ellen Saunders, and you might know her better as Oh So Els. Becky is a bag maker and Ellen is a dressmaker. And so between the 3 of us, we were doing the dressmaking, the bag making and the quilting. And we were hoping to have a sewing retreat in October, which was amazingly fully booked within like a week. It was incredible. And again, because of the COVID-19 situation, we've had to move that on, and now we're hoping to do that in March next year. Okay, so now I've got to check my notes and find out where I've got to. Over the COVID, you know, the lockdown period, I have started working for Sewing Street, and I've done some home videos for Sewing Street, which my son Charlie has very helpfully helped me to film. So probably in about March and April, you probably saw my hands a few times on the set, but not necessarily me. The other thing that my number 2 son has been doing for me is he's been furloughed. He was in furlough, and he's been building me a website. So he's built that up for me, and now I have a fully, well, I would say fully functioning, it's virtually there sort of website, with a shop and a gallery and all the sort of component parts. The other thing that I've been doing in lockdown is I did a commission piece, and the commission piece will be in Today's Quilter in September. And the other thing I did in lockdown is I had a long chat with Becky Alexander Frost, and we spoke about patterns extensively. And I said I produced patterns, probably last time I produced patterns was way back, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. I've produced a couple for Sewing Quarter TV, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to get back into patterns. So I've put a couple out there more recently, and the response to the patterns has been overwhelming. Absolutely incredible. I just never believed that there are so many people out there that wanted to make all the strange things that I want to make. So that's something else that has happened during lockdown, which has been a good thing and sort of pushed me in a different direction, although I'm still sticking with the cruise stuff and the retreat. Okay, so I think that is probably all the chit chat. So now we'll sort of move on to the go around the sewing room tour. It's something that I love watching other people's, so I hope you enjoy this tour that my husband, who's holding the camera, is about to give you. So let's start right at the beginning. Let's talk about some bits and pieces. So this is a Rascog trolley. I use it for pens, pencils. I've got all my rotary cutters and stuff in the top. And yes, I have tidied it up a bit. And then I've got I call this a pegboard edition with all the scissors on it. It's got a couple of boxes which I use as bins, and in addition to that it's got these little magnetic pouches which pin on the side. Comes in really handy. Then if we start to move around, yes, I crochet quite a lot. In between quilts I crochet. I find that hand sewing will give me one sort of pain in my shoulder, and when that's got too bad, if I switch into crochet, the crochet will probably give me another pain, but it's not the same as the hand sewing pain, so I'm switching basically between shoulders. Then, so that quilt with the tumblers in is the first quilt that I've set in a zigzag design. This was a quilt that I made whilst I was on holiday recently in San Antonio. I remember vividly unpicking it and restitching it, well not restitching it, unpicking it in the back of the car. Yes, the beard trimmer and the sewing machine go everywhere with me. So yeah, so that is an unusual setting for a tumbler block to produce a zigzag. And then if you move along, the next quilt is from a lady called Lisa Bongin, Primitive Gatherings. It's got a pieced 4-patch centre set on the diagonal with a wool applique border, just a little piece. Then there's a free pattern from Temecula Quilt Company, another one from Temecula, and then one on the end from a book called Little Quilts by Aditya Sitar. And then if you drop down, the applique quilt of the quilt show is from Jo Colwell of Cowslip Workshops in Launceston, I think she is. That's her pattern, and that's hand applique and machine applique as well, I think, and a little bit of machine quilting. I really enjoyed making that one. It was challenging, but I really enjoyed making it. And then just this came about because I decided to organise my buttons. When I organised my buttons, I decided to make this little quilt of flowers in flower pots. And then that's just a pattern of a quilt that a table mat that I'm currently working on. One of the things I haven't said about this wall is that all of my quilts are actually set on rulers. This isn't my idea. I can't claim it was my idea. It's if you look at the Temecula Quilt Company online, it's something that they've done for a very long time, and they're just ordinary rulers. Probably a lot of them are vintage rulers with some clips attached to them to hang the quilts on. The idea being that you can change the quilts around. So once I've made one, I swap them around every so often. But yes, the Temecula Quilt Company, if you're ever in California, is definitely the place to go. Okay, let's see if we can move around. So I have a dresser, which is full of, well, knickknacks. You can call it mess, you can call it knickknacks, but you guys are probably about the only people that might be interested in what I've got going on here. So I have got, this is an original design, little bee. It's meant to be the start of an alphabet quilt, but I haven't made the A or the C yet, so whether that ever gets any further will be interesting. Then in the cabinet I've got a couple of bears. Those were made whilst I was on a sewing cruise, and I took some classes from a talented lady called Heather Parsons Lynn. There's a little bit of crochet in there too, and at the bottom there's even some crochet cake. Yes, I am that mad. Okay, so we move along the bottom. So more evidence of crochet. Moving along here, this is just water and spray starch. And then this is like a combination project of crochet and a quilted liner. I've got a couple of these baskets, and this one's just full of bears, but I've got ones that are full of other things as well. If we go up, more crochet, my little knitted mouse. Yeah, that mouse definitely needs some clothes. And my knitting is very slow and very painful to watch. One of my vintage machines. This is called Chicken Scratch. So this is a chicken scratch pin cushion. Quite a lot of interest in that technique, something that you don't very often see around, not nowadays. And also is I've given it what they call a pie crust border around the edge to make it sort of sit together nicely. That worked out quite well. More evidence of crochet, a little bit of cross stitch and crochet again. And then if you go up, this is Luna Lappan. Everybody knows, has come across the books by Sarah Peel, and yeah, that's mine with a little crochet mouse. I don't know, it obviously crept in there. Some dressmaking patterns. This is like a variant of Luna Lappan, and I can't remember the name of the designer, but basically the thing that drove me to make it was the little boots. I really love the little boots, and I really love making them. They're just like, whoa, those are so dinky. So yeah. And then a jar. I've got a jar full of pin cushions. Yeah, I've made that many. And also I feel that the wool ones seem to attract fluff, whereas if I put them in the jar, it keeps them all nice and clean. A couple of the the heartstring pouches, which I made recently into a pattern and sold on my website. And then going down the other side, a few more quilty bits. This is a free pattern from Temecula. This is something that I designed and made during lockdown. It echoes that rainbow idea. Open the cupboard. Then I talked earlier on about the buttons. Yeah, I did. I organised my buttons by colour. So that's that. And then these are our pinwheels from Kathleen Tracy. They're just interfaced with a little bit of stiffener, and they make little pinwheels. And then on the top shelf, a bit more knitting. I think this is from Mary Jane's Tea Room. A little knitted bear, and my doll, which I really like and nobody else does. Everybody says that she's got a very spooky face, but there you go. I don't think she's that freaky. Okay. Just scoot along the bottom. So here's some parchment paper that I use for ironing, clapper, again for the iron, and just an ordinary like breadboard, which I use for making applique pieces. Clover clips, where would we be without them? 2 lots of sewing machine feet. A little a thread cutter. This is for chain piecing. So the idea is that it's from a pendant. You buy it as a pendant, and we've just stuck it in the top of a spool. And then what you can do is, once you've chain pieced a lot, you can just cut them along the top. It really speeds up the process. Bobbins. Okay. And across the top, a wool applique cushion, another vintage sewing machine. A goose made for me by a lovely lady called Suzanne Steele from Germany. And then that's just a crochet bag, and that's full of wool bits. Okay, so if we move on round, so I've got a design wall. It's not a proper, you know, calf design wall. It's just one that was made by my husband. It's just a piece of board with I think we bought this. It's like wadding or batting, but it's acrylic. We bought that in Joanne in the States and just wrapped it around. And I've got the Liberty chain needle case, which is a really popular pattern. There, log cabins. This is one where I think I sort of overshot the mark. So I really like making log cabins. I made these. The idea is that I'm going to make a 60-inch quilt. Well, this is as far as I've got. So, and they are really tiny. I think the logs are like a 1/4 inch wide. Some fabric I'm working with at the moment. Dresden plates, a couple of Dresden plates. A quilt, shouldn't probably still be there, from St. Patrick's Day. A crochet garland. Ooh, and some zips that I'm coveting at the moment. I'm absolutely coveting these zips. They come from Rose Garden Patchwork. I think they're Japanese. I really like them because they've got little charms on them. And then crochet bunting and some awards that are along the top, rosettes from previous years. Ooh, and if I get my husband to scoot down, so it looks a little worn, but this is my vintage ironing board. Basically, we just bought the base in a thrift shop or a second-hand shop. We stripped off all the top, and then I've just covered it with blocks that I had hanging around and a little bit of lace, and it works really well. It's not very wide, and sometimes to add to the width, I will pop one of these boards on top if I want something a little bit wider. But saying that, it's a small room, so it works out quite well for me. Moving along, there's the Mandy Shaw put that out when we went into lockdown. So it reminds me of the time, because I've spent a lot of time as well during lockdown making scrubs. So I've hung that in my window and made scrubs. This next one is vintage Fisac yo-yos made into a quilt. Those scraps were sent to me from by my friend from the States. I made them into yo-yos. I just used like a yo-yo maker, a plastic one. This is punch needle. Now punch needle I really like, but I haven't done a lot of it. It's quite time consuming, but it gives you a little raised effect, like a little carpet. I've taught that a couple of times as well at the West Country Quilt Show, but it's an interesting technique. And there's a lady called Missy Carpenter, and her patterns actually combine punch needle with pieced quilts, which I think looks absolutely amazing. So if you want to look out for any of those patterns. Next one is a flannel quilt with wool applique hearts on. This is a Primitive Gatherings pattern. Next one, this is a mini quilt that I actually made whilst on holiday in February when we were in Corpus Christi, and I made this in the hotel room whilst my husband was at work. This one I'm going to call Rolled Gold, and if you're American you'll understand why. And the final one is a gifted one from Marion Edwards from Australia. Sorry, if you drop down, then this is where I keep my threads. So it's a reclaimed printer's tray, and all I've done is got lots of little Liberty scraps, pop them, cut them up, glued them in just using a regular Pritt stick. It was a morning's work. It wasn't as labour intensive as you could think, and if you're a colour junkie, which I would definitely say I am, it was great fun to make. And I know lots of people have seen this before and gone on to make the same thing. And then there's a little gift in the middle at the top from a friend, which I really like. It's a little tin. Then moving back this way, the lemonade sign came from Simply Vintage. I think it's this month or the summer edition. I collect vintage linens, and that's a latest piece. I think I paid something like £1.50 for it. But I'm going to have a go at putting a little bit of free motion through it. It's there to inspire me at the minute. The next one is Buttermilk Basin, and it actually does say, was it underneath there? This is my happy place. Yeah. And the doll is a Rosalie Quinlan one that I finished recently, which I'm about to give to a friend's baby when she actually turns up. She was due probably last week, so hopefully that'll be going in that direction soon. Okay, so if you go on down from there, it's my Sashko machine. I've really enjoyed using the Sashko machine. I bought it second hand from a lady that I met through Sewing Quarter, and it's totally different to any other machine that I own. Yes, it was splashing out, but I think I'm going to use it over and over again. I've made a few things to start off with, and at the moment I'm thinking I might start making sort of journal covers which require that sort of hand stitch look, so I'm going to have some experiments with that. I have an overlocker. I have a Dukey overlocker, which I bought through Sewing Quarter, and I love my overlocker. It's one of these air threading ones, so it's easy to thread, because otherwise I was getting myself in a bit of a state threading an overlocker. I think we all do. When you think, oh my goodness me, it's come unthreaded, then you sort of panic and think, oh, but this is an air threading one, and it's worked perfectly, and I've used it a lot when I was making the scrubs, and I use it a lot when I do make jersey dresses and that sort of thing on there as well, which is good. Then moving on down to the window, I've just got some rulers. I think this is Beth Stoodley. I think this is her design. It's like a quilted caddy, I think it's called. Again, featuring some vintage linens in the top. And then, I don't know whether I want my husband to go too far into that window. Yeah, that's the sort of dumping corner with some 3-stranded Valdani and a rope basket. This is where I keep all my wool for my crochet. My fabric is upstairs in my office upstairs, because I do have another room, unfortunately. Then he's not going to hone in on my pile of stuff that I'm currently doing. It's rather a large pile. I mean, who wants to work on one project at a time? So yeah, let's move on swiftly on down. At the bottom in the case, you can see this is my store of Valdani threads. I absolutely love Valdani. They're cotton embroidery threads, Perlé 12, variegated, perfect for both wool applique and by hand and by machine. So yeah, really love using those. I use those a lot. Okay, I think we're now nearly all the way around. I haven't told you about my most favourite machine then. Leave the best to last. So this is my Dukey 2010Q. It's a fantastic machine. It's American. I bought it whilst I was there. It only does one thing. It only does a straight stitch, and it does it really, really well. So I use it for all my piecing, and I use it for quilting as well. And it's very fast. It's got one of those little tortoise to hair buttons, and it is a very fast machine. All mechanical. I really like it a lot. If my house was going to burn down, the one machine I come back in to get would be this one. I think I mentioned I do have 7 others, including the featherweight tutu ones which I take on holiday. The other main machine I have is a Bernina, and that's on the floor under there. It's a 770. We tolerate each other. It's a heavily computerized, top of the range machine. It's got a lot of functions on there that I don't use, but some I do use a lot. So at the moment we're just rubbing along together. Okay, I think you've probably been around the whole room now. So thank you very much for watching. Do find my website if you can, which is sallieannquilts.com. Also, my next pattern, which is coming out on August the 14th, will be on there, and it's a Christmas themed pincushion sewing caddy with wool applique, so it's a little bit different. So I hope you tune in and find that. And also, if you enjoyed my ramble and a little bit of sewing chit chat, do hit the subscribe button. Thank you very much for watching.